think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jason Green, Program Manager on the client team. I'm the PM for Form Patterns, so hopefully any questions that you guys have, we can answer it in this session. So what we're going to talk about is a new construct in the form development experience in VS. And so just from an agenda standpoint, I want to talk first about why we did this. So what were the things in the past that we learned from in order to get to what these form patterns are? Then we're going to switch and look at what exactly are these form patterns. Why do we want you guys to put them on your forms? How do they help you? We want to look at the tooling. So how is this integrated into VS? What kinds of extra add-ins and have we created to help you guys apply patterns? There's a new patterns information panel that you may have seen in some of the other labs. So we'll walk through what all the information is in that. And then finally, you guys are probably interested in, you're going to be migrating your solutions from AX12 onto AX7. And so what does this mean for your migration process? That's probably a big question. How much work is applying form patterns going to be? So I want to spend a few minutes at the end talking about what the effect is going to be on you guys at the end. All right, so where did this come from? So how many people in AX 2012 created forms from form templates? Pretty much everyone. So for those of you that don't know, form templates were basically, they gave you the structure, right, for the form style. This is the standard for what a details master form may look like. We give you the required controls. It would default some properties for you, right? It would say, oh, I need to set this style, I need to set these other properties. Once you created a form from that template, you guys were free to do whatever with that form you wanted. You could add controls, you could change the properties that we defaulted. It was basically free reign. And so the form style checker, how many people use this in 2012? A smaller number, that's what I expected. So what this add-in did in VS was it would basically compare your final form against the template and say, where are you different? So on a control by control basis, say, do you have this control? Yes. Do you have these properties set to the defaults that the template set? Yes or no. And it would output a report that would tell you where you deviated. And so the important thing about this was it was optional. So you guys, if you didn't care about the template, you never had to run it. And maybe that's why people didn't run this. But if you did, you had to explicitly choose to run the style checker to figure out where you deviated. So the things that we heard as people, the pain points that we heard in 2012 from this were the following. I only find out what I did wrong, so where I deviated from that template when I chose to run that form style checker. It would be nice if the development experience itself would tell me, hey, these are the places where you're deviating. And so that's one of the things we wanted to address. The second one was there were only a very limited number of form templates in AX 2012. I think there was a list of about 8. And so you guys would build forms that wouldn't fit those templates, so you really had no help on building those other kinds of forms. And so we wanted to address that. And then the last one was you get these form templates that are set at form design, but you don't get any help building sub-content in your form. So if you have a tab page with regular content, there's no template for those kinds of things. And so that's kind of where this whole form pattern idea came from. So what we did was we took the form templates, the form style checker, we kind of evolved those, integrated into the development environment. So now you don't have to run it optionally. That stuff is going to be outputted to you immediately as you're building the form. We've added a lot more form patterns, so there's a lot more templates or patterns for you to apply to your forms. And we've also added the concept of subpatterns. So now a tab page can have a pattern. So if you have a very typical one, if you have a action pane strip and a grid, very common in the product, toolbar and list subpattern. Immediately it will set some properties for you. So that's kind of the background about where this came from. So what do these look like in Dynamics AX? So the pattern itself is going to look a lot like those form templates. It's the basic structure of your form. So it's the hierarchical structure of all the controls. It will include optional and required controls. It will tell you which types of controls are allowed in which containers so that you match those template structures. We're also going to set metadata properties for you. So the idea is these are things that you shouldn't have to worry about. So we're going to set these on your behalf. We're going to hide them actually from the property pane so they're not even in your face. So you just have to focus on the properties that you actually may need to adjust. So a lot of the properties that we set are the layout properties. And the reason we do this is now that you're in a browser and your form needs to be responsive based on those different widths, we're trying to set up all the layout for you so you get that for free. So the bottom is an example. This isn't the format that you guys will see. This is the XML backend for the simplest pattern. So you can see there's some properties set on form design. Then there's an action pane underneath there. And you can see by the count property on the far, right for you guys, that there is one or more. So we can define how many of these controls can be in this container. And so this is kind of giving you a snapshot of what these patterns look like. So I want to step back again just to talk about terminology. So anytime I say form pattern in this talk, what I'm referring to is the top level. So the ones that are on form design. So it's giving you the global structure of the form. So form pattern, top level pattern. If we say subpattern, that's at the container level. So it's a local structure of the form. So they're going to be our two distinctions as we continue through this presentation. So the big question is why do you want to use patterns, right? Why spend the time to go through your forms and apply these patterns? So I want to talk through several of them. So the first one is consistent UI. So once you put these patterns on your forms, that's going to mean that everyone's forms have more consistent metadata. That means the user is going to see a more consistent user interface. So if they go to a form they haven't seen before, but it's a simple list of details, they know exactly how it's supposed to behave. They know what kind of responsive behavior it's going to give them. And so it's less learning for them to figure out how to use new forms. I also mentioned the responsive layout aspect. We're setting a lot of the layout properties for you. This is going to become more important as we move into the mobility space. So as the client shrinks down into mobile form factors, we're going to make sure that the patterns have those layout properties set so your form will do the transformations it needs to as you move down to those smaller form factors. And so you get this stuff for free if you're on the pattern. If you're not on the pattern, then you have to worry about testing and making sure that your layout settings are correct and that you're getting that responsive design that you want. The second one for you as developers is form validation, right? So you want to know that, hey, this is going to look the way I think it's going to look. So it's going to tell you, oh, there's a control that's not in the right place. Oh, there's a property that's not set that you need to have set. Oh, you can't have this control here. Or I can't find this control that you put on the form. I don't know what to do with it. And so there's a lot of validation that's going to happen as well. The third one, again, for the development side standpoint, is a simplified development experience. So we're guiding you into what controls you need to put in the form, where they go, and we're also, again, we're setting those properties for you so you have less work to do on that end. And then the last one, and this is potentially the most important one for you guys, is the upgrade factor. So once you're on a form pattern, so these are versioned, we have upgrade scripts that will move you automatically from version to version. So you don't have to do any of the work. Once you're on a form pattern, we're going to bump you along as the form pattern changes. And why could it change? Maybe there's some functional component that we add to the pattern, so you guys would get that for free. Maybe there's some visual change that we're going to make. So let me give you an example. You guys have seen the workspaces, right? Horizontal scrolling panoramas. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that we decided we wanted to make the workspaces scroll vertically to be more in line with how most web pages work. So we update the pattern, we make whatever structural changes, whatever property changes we need, boom. Everyone that's on the pattern automatically, when you go through that upgrade, run the upgrade script, all of your forms are automatically going to move to the new visuals. If you didn't set the pattern, if you decided to go custom, which we'll talk about in a minute, all of that work is going to be manual. You're going to have to figure out, oh, what changes need to be made? How do I make my workspace look like the other ones? So So from an upgrades perspective, it's going to be important that you guys get on these patterns. All right, so the patterns that are available. So we talked about before in AX 2012, you had about, I think, 8 form templates. We've expanded that list considerably. So you'll see a lot of the form styles that you recognize from 2012. There are certain variants of those that we found common in the product, and so each of those will have a form pattern as well. So in terms of just form patterns themselves, there's 15 different classes up here, and then 33 different variants. So for example, simple list and details, there's 3 variants, and that just is different on what is on the left-hand side. Whether you have a list grid, the new style list grid, which is what we would prefer. You can also keep your tabular grid, or you can have a tree. So there's, and those have different, so the tabular grid, the tree grid have splitters that you can move. The list grids don't need that. So based on what kinds of controls are in these different variants, that's why you would pick these. On the subpattern side, so AX 2012, there was 0 help for helping you define subcontent of your form. Now we have 13 different classes of subpatterns and 21 variants in all. And so the form patterns themselves are going to say in certain containers, hey, this is the list of subpatterns that I like in this container. And so again, we'll look at these in a little bit in more detail. And so as we have been developing these form patterns, you may ask, how much effort have you guys spent internally aligning the app suite to form patterns? And we spent a tremendous amount of time doing this because of that upgrade, because we wanted to have consistent UI. And so what this is showing you is we have roughly 6,000 forms that are in the application between Foundation, between App Suite. 92% of those have a top-level form pattern applied. So our goal was 90 to 95, so we're in the right neighborhood. There are some things that we know we need to do to push that number up a little bit, but this is a pretty good start. And so the takeaway for you guys here is that this should be roughly, ideally, this is where your guys' solutions would end as well. We would like for your numbers on your solutions to be at this level of form pattern coverage. We know there are places where there are forms that are going to be custom that will never fit a pattern. They're one-off, not going to happen. And there are places where we don't have great coverage on things, so we'll talk about some of those in a minute as well. But this is kind of the goal for where you guys should be with your solutions as well. I guess I will mention the 1% up there is unspecified. So that just means that no attempt has been made to apply a pattern. And most of those are Russian and Indian forms that we haven't shipped yet. So those will be getting patterns once we look at those forms. I'm going to skip that. What about the subpattern side? So this is a chart showing the kind of the top subpatterns that are used in the system. So field and field groups is used in about half, a little less than half of the subpatterns that are used in the system. And this is the important one. This is just a container that has fields. It's going to responsibly decide how many columns it gets based on the browser width. So that obviously is going to be a lot. Toolbar and list is another one we already talked about. You'll notice our custom on the subpatterns is also a small number. It's at 7%. Another measure we can look at to see how well our forms are covered by patterns is something called total control coverage. So what this means is that you have a pattern. It specifies what controls it covers. So a form pattern can have that. A subpattern can cover certain controls. So if we take all of the controls in the system, when we say how many of those controls are under a subpattern or under a form pattern, these are the numbers we're looking at. 84% of all of the over 200,000 controls and all the 6,000 forms are currently covered by patterns. So it's a significant portion of the application that's covered. So let's talk a little bit more about custom. So what happens if you're building a form and you decide, hey, my form or my container doesn't fit one of your patterns. I need to do something unique, or There's nothing that fits. You do have an explicit option to say, I want to be custom. And so I've listed a few reasons right now a few of the common reasons we've seen internally about why people need to go custom. So right now, extensible controls aren't well covered by patterns, with notable exceptions of charts have a pattern, and dimension entry control, dimension expression builder. But other than that, most of the extensible controls are not covered by patterns. We have future work to address this, but if you have a container that uses a custom or an extensible control, you will likely have to go custom at this point, and that's okay. We'll fix that later. Static text. So there are some places in dialogues, main instruction, secondary instruction, where we expect static text. A lot of other places where it's kind of in the middle of fields. Those aren't places where we want static text to be anymore. Most of those are usually form help or field help, and there are other places where we want to expose that besides static text. The other reason why is our layout algorithm that does that responsiveness. It doesn't like the size of these controls, and so it throws off the alignment of fields. And so for that reason, we're not allowing static text inside of field and field groups. If you choose to keep those in the midst of your fields, that's a good reason why you'd have to go custom. Using form parts outside of workspaces is not well covered right now. Again, this is an item on our backlog to address this. The layout algorithm only allows one level of nesting inside field and field groups. So if you have a group with fields, it's fine. If you have a group inside of a group inside of a group with fields, the layout algorithm doesn't know how to rearrange your columns. So it's you have to flatten your fields out to hit this subpattern. A few others. There are places where people have empty containers that are filled programmatically. We don't handle that very well right now. And then a scenario that I've heard more from the partner ISV channel is I have multiple views of a container. So maybe I have a detailed transaction form, and I have two different versions of a lines grid. And at runtime, I decide which one I want to show. So it ends up, we don't have a good way to cover that right now in patterns, but we also do have work planned for that. All right, so what does it mean if you decide to choose custom? So again, if you're on the pattern, we set layout properties for you. We kind of guarantee that you're going to be responsive. Once you go custom, that responsibility is now on your shoulders. There's a document on the wiki that will outline the steps we've had internal teams go through, where you have to test on different browsers, different resolutions, different zooms, different viewport sizes, just to make sure that your form is responding to different sizes the way you would expect. So it's a little bit of work, but that's part of what happens if you choose custom. The other thing, obviously, you're not going to get the free upgrade as the patterns involve, that we talked about before. If we make that change to the workspace pattern, and you're not on the workspace, and you're not using the workspace pattern, you're going to have to do those steps manually. And then the last one, which is more of an ISV certification thing, if you use custom, it's going to flag a BP rule in the development environment. And if you want to be certified, we're requiring that you exclude all of those BPs and provide justifications about why you couldn't fit the pattern. So we've done that internally with all of our customs, and that's what we're using to prioritize enhancements to the patterns tooling in the future. And so we're asking you guys to do the same. All right. Let's step into a demo on form patterns. So what we're going to do, and there's an article on the wiki called Form Styles and Patterns that's going to go through this outline as well. But I want to walk through what happens when you apply a pattern to a form. And so there's kind of 4 steps. There's going to be find a form, so we need to figure out which forms we can actually apply patterns to. We need to figure out which form pattern actually fits. So we'll walk through some of the documentation materials that are available so that you guys can start to learn these patterns and when to use them. There's actually the process of applying the pattern itself. And then before the pattern is formally applied, you have to fix any errors, because Yeah. So let me connect. I got kicked off of my machine. Are there any questions before we start the demo? Are we unleashing the floodgates on that?
I just want to ask, is it possible to make your own custom pattern, just so that way, you follow your own template? I
Sure.
understand there'd still be no upgrade possibility, but, if you say, all right, I know there are several custom forms that will follow this format, would you be allowed to do something like that?
So the question was, are you guys allowed to create your own patterns so that you can use internally? Right now, we do not allow that. We are talking about the possibility. There is the upgrade issue. There's also been some feedback that we have too many patterns, and it's kind of overwhelming when you're trying to pick a pattern, and so adding to that may or may not be helpful. But we are discussing it, but you cannot right now.
Could you make them visual somehow? Because just from the names, sometimes you cannot distinguish which pattern you would actually.
The question was, can you make the patterns visual when you're selecting them so that you have a better idea of what they look like? That is an idea that's been discussed as well, and when we look through the documentation, there are pictures in there that you can use to help select right now.
So there is documentation describing each of the patterns and where you should be used with some kind of example.
There is documentation for each of the patterns. We're going to walk through that in just a second. Yep. So the comment was it would be helpful if there were sample forms with all of the patterns. Yep, I will show you. The documentation has examples forms in the system. I will also show you a way where you can search through the forms to find any form in the system that has that pattern. So we're getting to that. Let me switch over. All right, so the first step in that was finding a form that has a form pattern. And so what I'm going to do is there's an add-in under Dynamics AX that's called Run Form Patterns Report. And so we're going to start that off while I talk for a second. So this is going to launch a background process that's going to walk through all of the forms and all of the models and generate a report giving you patterns information that we'll look at. That was pretty fast. So the forms that will need patterns are the ones, if you see here, I don't know if that's big enough, it says design pattern : unspecified. So again, unspecified means no attempt has been made to set a pattern on this form. So these are the ones that you want to target for actually applying patterns. If you want to try to reduce custom, you can target the ones that have pattern custom as well. So the form patterns report, if we go to documents, open this guy up. So this guy's going to give you lots of information about each of the forms. So it's going to give you the model that it's in, the form style that's set on it, if there's a pattern set, what pattern is set. These are kind of size of the form, so how many controls are on the form and how many of those controls are covered by patterns. And so that's aggregated here under percent covered. So that total coverage number we were looking at earlier is kind of derived from this. And then there's a couple of important columns over here, how many unspecified nodes you have in the form and how many custom counts. So if you want to find a form that you need to apply a form pattern, you can open this guy up, filter, and all you need to do is select the pattern that is blank. And all of these forms are ones that would be candidates for applying a form pattern. How do you get what? What was the question? How do you get the report? I'll go back. In VS, under the Dynamics AX menu, under add-ins, there's an option that's called Run Form Patterns Report. So you guys can do this on your machines. Should work well. So you can grab a form off of that list, load it in Excel. So the one I have here is I've modified custable just for a demo today. So the next question is picking the form pattern that you actually want to use. So there's, like we said, there's 15 different classes. There's 33 variants of form patterns. How do I know which one? So if it's something like a template that's close to what you guys use in AX 2012, maybe a details, simple list and details, you probably have a pretty good idea of what what that pattern is going to include. But some of the other ones that are new, you may not know. So what I want to look at now is if you go in AX and you go to Help, and we're just going to click the AX Help Wiki and show you guys where this documentation is. That way you guys can get to it later. It's going to search for select pattern. How many people have been in the wiki looking around documentation since they've been here? Good. We've spent a lot of time getting stuff in here, so if there's anything that you guys think that needs to be there that's not, make sure you let us know. All right, this document called Selecting a Form Pattern. So this is kind of the place I'd point you if you don't have any idea what pattern you want to apply. So what we've done is there's a couple of sections here. So one of the things you can use is form style. If that's set, that's usually a pretty good indicator of at least the class of form that or pattern that you want to apply. And so there's a table here. If you have these styles, maybe with some conditions, these are the patterns that you want. These are the patterns that you'll likely want to apply. And each one of these are links that will take you to that individual pattern document. And we'll look at one of those in a second as well. There's even some if you have auto, but your form has certain things, it will suggest a pattern in here as well. One thing to be wary is form style is not always correct, so it's not the end all. The other piece that I want to look at is this. So there are these tables that will have the classes of form patterns. They will list kind of the main usage. If there's variants, when would you use this versus the basic one? And there are screenshots of the different views or what those forms may look like. So it's just a quick help to say, hey, does my form look like this? It's probably this pattern. And so as you scroll through, each one of these also links back to the individual form pattern or pattern guideline document. So there are examples, screenshots of all of these, drop dialogues, fact boxes, list page, the lookup variants, panorama sections. So these are the ones that are used in workspaces. Simple details, simple list. And so on and on. And then there's also the same thing for the subpattern. So a table with the classes, examples, quick description of when you might use each one of these. So again, this is going to be a good single place to go to try to figure out where you might start to pick your form pattern. From here, let's go up to the details master one. And now we'll look at the guideline doc for an individual pattern. So I think all of the patterns have these these documents. Card may be the one exception right now. But these are all structured approximately the same way. So there's a usage section at the top. If you have different variants of that pattern, they'll be listed, again, with explanations about when you might use one or the other. There's always a section of wireframes, so looking at this form pattern from an abstract view without the contents, you can kind of see what the general layout is to see if that matches your form. So this one has details and grid view. The variant, I don't know if you guys are familiar with HCM Worker. It kind of has it was the old table of contents style with the details form, so that's what this one is. There'll be a section for pattern changes. So basically, this is going to describe anything that's different from the 2012 template, if one existed. So what changes we've made since 2012. So you can kind of get a look of what you might expect. There's a very detailed structural diagram of what this pattern looks like. It will show if controls are required or optional. Sometimes it will show if certain properties are set. Not all of them are going to be listed here. You will have links to other patterns that are similar or subpatterns that are commonly used inside of this pattern, so you can link around quickly to figure out what you may use inside of this pattern. There's also a section for UX guidelines. So these are things that we can't enforce through the pattern definition itself, at least at this point. But they're things that you can look at the form after you've applied it and say, are there any other changes I can make to make sure that my form is following the Microsoft UX guidelines? And then, as was mentioned over here, there's an example as well. So there'll be a form. If it's not route navigable, there should be a path to how you get to that form through AX as well. And so you'll have screenshots. These were probably taken, I think I updated these last, maybe CTP 8, so they may not have the RTW visuals yet, but I will work on getting those in as well. But they will give you a general idea of what the form should look like. And so you can see one of the things we did that was different from 2012 was the details view has this navigation list added to the side that you can pop in and out. And then at the bottom, if there's any frequently asked questions about this pattern, why did you do this, or could you do this, we will list those here and provide answers as well. And then if there's any 2012 content related to the corresponding form template, that information is here too. So what we tried to do was get all the information you might need about this pattern, stick it into a doc, and let you guys learn about the patterns through this. Any questions about the documentation? It is true that for the new Dynamics AX, the wiki is the primary source of documentation. For AX7, yes. Yes, the question was, is the wiki the primary source of documentation? Will the content be available in MSDN? I do not believe so. I believe they're wanting to keep it inside the wiki. And eventually, I think they want to open it up so you guys can contribute and edit. And I think that is the plan. The question was, in the future, will all the descriptions of classes and methods and fields and properties be moved into the wiki? I believe this is supposed to be the place where documentation goes. Sure. Yep, at this moment there is some split between the old content for the old version content and the new. Yes. Are there any plans to move the old content into the wiki? So some of that content has already been moved over. I can tell you, for example, the advanced filtering page that listed all of the advanced query syntax is already in the wiki. I'll have to follow. If there are specific examples, I can follow up with the classes and fields. I can check on that. Right. So the question is, the comment was you may need to check both places if you're looking for information. So my advice at this point is if you know that documentation existed, if it's a class definition or a field definition, I would go to MSDN right now, but any new net content for AX7, for the new Dynamics AX, should be here. It will not be on MSDN. Yep. Can you repeat that? Sorry. The security for, sorry. Security for the patterns? The patterns. Sure, so the question was, how is security handled with these patterns? So the patterns just sit on top of the forms. Whatever security you apply to the form buttons, we're not touching security with the pattern. It's only the controls, the structure of the controls and which ones are present. You would still have all of the other security mechanisms available to define when controls appear in what situations. The question was, are patterns allowed for form extensions? Yes, and overlayering. So you can apply, it's usually subpatterns, right? Once you're in the form extension, you still have to abide by the pattern that's set on the base form. So there are some restrictions there, I suppose. But yes, form patterns do work on form extensions and overlaying. So the question is about a create scenario. Can I create a form with a pattern? You can create a form. You can copy a form. What we haven't done yet, which I was going to talk about in a little bit, is the create scenario was not one we focused on for this release. It was more of a migration release. So the whole creating a new form based on a pattern is not there yet. It's been a frequent ask, and it will be coming, but it's not there yet. So entire form from a form pattern or a structure or a subpattern, not there yet. And also, as we'll see, if there are missing controls in the pattern, you have to add them manually. But we'll look at ways to streamline that in the future as well. Okay, we will keep going. So we've found the form that we want to apply a pattern to. We've decided that this cust table is a details master form. So now we want to go back and we want to apply a pattern. And actually, before we do that, we'll just look. This is what cust table looks like. As you guys know, you'll see I have the custom filter in the wrong. Let me go back. For the sake of the demo, the quick filter happens to be in the wrong spot. We'll fix that in a second. And then if we look at this miscellaneous details tab, this is kind of using the old layout, right? You guys used to define, this is how big I want my form to be. It needs to be 3 columns of fields, and it's set, right? And those kinds of layout things don't work so well once you're in a responsive environment. So this guy is 3 columns wide, regardless of how big my browser is. It doesn't really adjust. And so that's something we'll look to solve for with the pattern. So how do you apply a pattern? This is actually super easy. So you're going to right-click on the control that needs a pattern. There's an apply pattern option in the right-click menu. And then there's a large list of form patterns. Again, you can see why adding more patterns from a custom standpoint might start to become overwhelming because we're already at a pretty large list at this point. One thing that we do want to do with this eventually is kind of collapse this into a multi-level, say, hey, I want a dialogue, and then give you the 6 variants of dialogues. That way it's a little bit simpler. We haven't gotten around to doing that yet. But this is as simple as click. You can see this is updated to say master details. We're wanting to apply the master details pattern to this form. So it's not actually applied. The patterns, or the properties that the pattern set are not on the controls yet. That only happens after you've saved it or built it with no errors. So while you're in the process of making the adjustments into the pattern, we are not setting properties for you. That only happens at the very end. And so you'll notice that whenever I assign this pattern, there's this pattern tab that has what we're calling the pattern information panel. So this is kind of your guide to say, how do I build this form? So it's going to list underneath form design, these are the children that I'm looking for. There's an action pane. There's a group. There's a tab. And these have to be in this particular order in this case. If there are ways to say you can have children in any order, and it will be specified over here. We'll look at an example later. There's cardinality notations on the side here. You can see this one says 1 ... in. That's probably hard to read in the back. That just means, if you guys have done like database diagrams, 1's required, but you can have as many as you want after that. If it doesn't have something there, that means it's required. If it's optional, we'll say 0 ... 1. If it's optional but you can have many, it can be 0 ... in. So the usual notation will kind of define what kinds of controls and how many controls can go in there. The other thing that you'll notice is that the patterns matching engine has kind of matched these parts to the actual control. So this action pane is matching this action pane header. And this actually gives us a way you can navigate in the form designer this way. And so the patterns tab will update to show you what the pattern is expecting at the next level. So you can see this one underneath the application bar, there's nothing. That means you're free to do anything that the development environment will allow you. You can put tabs, you can put button groups, and do your normal thing. You'll notice this particular tab control has this exclamation point and this yellow highlight around the box. What that is telling you is that somewhere in that subtree, there's a problem with the pattern. It's not going to tell you exactly what. You're going to have to drill down and find out what it is. But it's giving you a hint that, hey, this pattern is not going to be applied successfully right now if we try to save. And so let's just for the sake of demonstration, let's see what happens if we do save. So the act of saving does a validation on the form. And then in the error list, you can see we're going to get a couple of errors. It's saying there's a missing control required by this pattern. So it's telling you that, hey, there's something that the pattern is expecting that's not there. You need to fix that. And then it's also saying, hey, we have a quick filter control that's in the wrong place. We saw that in the screenshot, right? The quick filter was at the bottom, not at the top. The pattern's telling you, hey, you need to go fix this. And so even if you double click on these, it's going to navigate you into the designer to the point, the control that has the issue. So let's take a look at this container. So we've moved down to the grid view tab page. So again, we see that we have a required custom filter group, we have a required grid, and we have a required default action. So it's saying that you'll see the red tells you when you have missing controls. Again, this is the create scenario that we haven't gotten to yet. Eventually, you'll just be able to click a button and it'll add it for you. Not quite there yet, but that will be coming in the future. It also tells you if there are things that it can't match. So the pattern matching says, oh, I see a quick filter, but I don't know what to do with this. So it just puts it at the bottom and says you need to figure out something to do. And so what this pattern actually looks for in this case is you have a group around your filters. So you're going to have your quick filter in there, and you're going to have any other custom filters that you define, and those need to be at the top. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make some adjustments to make that happen. So one thing that we did do as well is we took advantage of the fact that you can write add-ins for VS. Have you guys been to any of these sessions yet? So you guys can create your own add-ins. And so in the process of applying patterns, we realized there were certain actions that you had to take regularly in order to apply patterns. And so what we did was we wrapped some of those, 2 of those, into add-ins so we could speed up your process. So for example, there was one of the common ones is, hey, this needs to go into a group. And so if you right-click on quick filter, for example, add in, refactor into, insert into new group, it is going to automatically reparent that control inside of a new group for you. So you could have done this manually, you could have created a new group, you could have dragged it in, trying to save you a little bit of time. And so we'll move this guy up. And you'll notice that, hey, now the pattern's happier. We have those check marks next to each part in the pattern that's saying, hey, it's finding the things I want. I'm happy now. One thing to note here, if you can see on this one, it says pattern : select. So when a form pattern requires that a subpattern be set at a level, this is the notation you get. And this is also going to result in a build error if you don't resolve this. So the pattern will not be able to be applied if you leave these required subpatterns off. And so we're just going to quickly, there's only one option here. In the future, this is something else we'll fix where we will automatically apply it if there's only one option, but right now you have to do it yourself. And so now this, this container looks good. And so let's try saving again and seeing where we're at. So our validation is complete. Our error list is empty. We have check marks on all our columns, so now we can say the form pattern has been successfully applied. At this point, we've set the properties that the pattern says it's going to set, and we've also hidden them from the form design. So if you'll notice over here, the style property is no longer showing up, for example. The pattern sets it to details master, and it's not going to let you change it at this point. Right, the comment is if you're missing a property, it's likely because the pattern is setting it for you. And if you want to look at it, the quick way right now, or the only way right now, is to remove the pattern, and you can see that style shows back up. Eventually, we would like to make a tab inside the property pane where you can click and see all the properties that are being set by the pattern to make it a little bit easier, but right now you just have to remove it. They are read-only, yeah, you cannot change them. They will be in the XML if they're different from the default. So the question was, can you open the XML and see the properties? Yes. If we're setting it to the default value, they won't show up, but just because we only show non-default values. So let's set this guy back. All right, so that's applying a form pattern, fairly straightforward. The subpattern case is the same process. Find a container, pick the right subpattern, apply it. You just saw me apply the subpattern, and fix any errors. So I want to step back to the first part of that. How do you find a container that needs a subpattern? So again, we're going to go back and we're going to look at an add-in that we added. So if you click over here on the form name and go to add-ins and go to form statistics, it's going to open this dialog that's going to give you some information about the form. So how many controls, what your form style is, and the bottom section is the part that's going to be important for the pattern. So this is basically that row from the form patterns report just for this form. And so the important pieces of information here are the unspecified count. So if you have a pattern on the top level on the form design and you have unspecifieds left in your form, that means it's a subpattern somewhere else in your form structure. And so those are the places where you need to go to find your unspecifieds. And again, that unspecified structure our unspecified count is in this spreadsheet as well. So if we look at everything with a pattern and then look at everything that has an unspecified count, these are all of the forms where a subpattern could be applied as well. So you can use that form patterns report to kind of look at for a form. You can't find the subcontainers here quickly, but you at least know how many there are, which ones need attention. So the next question is how do you find those unspecified containers? Because nobody wants to walk through the entire form tree and figure out how to do this, right? This is actually super simple. So there's a search mechanism for the form. Let's look for unspecified. Boom. Tab page, tab page, tab page, tab page. Very quick way to find the unspecifieds that you need to apply subpatterns for on a form. And so we can expand some of these. So the address tab is one of those that has a form part. So this one is one that's going to be custom. This one's in the same boat. The ones that we want to look at, I want to look at this one, which is direct mandate. So this guy has an action pane, or action pane strip, a toolbar, so a set of actions followed by a grid. That sounds like what? That toolbar and list pattern that we saw before. So we will simply apply pattern. You'll notice that this is not the full set of subpatterns, right? So what the tooling is doing is it's going to limit it to the ones that the form pattern says is acceptable for this content area. So we're helping you out a little bit there. So toolbar and list. This one's actually good as it is. You can save and you'll be fine. This guy. So this is the details, miscellaneous details. You've got groups that just have fields. So this is a good candidate. This was that 3-column container we were looking at. This is a good candidate for the field and field group. So we get that responsive feel. So we'll try to apply the field and field groups pattern. And you'll notice there's one control that says, hey, I don't know what to do with this. And so you can click on that. And what happens here is you can see, oh, we have an extra group. We have too much nesting of groups. This is probably unnecessary. This isn't providing a caption. It's just an extra container that's not serving any purpose. I just want to remove this and put these groups back in this administration group. And so again, this is that other refactoring, getting rid of extra groups. So if I right-click on this group, hit add-ins and say remove group and reparent my children, that's exactly what it's going to do. That's what it should have done. Where did they go? I know, but I should have had 4 fields there. It does work. I don't know why it didn't work here, but that is the purpose of that add-in, is to take something out of a group, reparent the children controls in the same position in that group where they are. Oh, that may be, let's take that off. There we go. See, you guys are so good at this. All right, so we fixed that extra group. Now the field and field groups looks good. We will save, and we're going to leave those other unspecifieds right now. The other ones are just custom. And we'll go ahead and launch the form and see what happens once we made those changes.
Does it automatically build the form every time you save?
Saving will only validate. But if you hit Control F5 to start without debugging, it will do the incremental build before it launches. The question was, does it compile when you save? All right, so we'll look at the details form. We have this miscellaneous details section. you can see now we're going to responsively add columns as our browser size allows. Maybe. It may be just right on the edge where there's not quite enough space. And so there you go. That's applying patterns and subpatterns. Seem too difficult? So from internal experience when we had app teams doing this, when they first started, it was a little bit kind of clunky trying to figure out which patterns and the tooling. But once you've messed with this, it's actually very, very nice. It's very quick. It helps you figure out exactly where things should go. All right, let's switch back.
So I've got another question, sorry. You applied, basically, because there was an address tab, you applied the custom or kind of applied the standard pattern, yes?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Because you said that whenever there is a dynamic field in the group, you should apply the custom. That's what is happening in the address bar, in the address tab, yes?
The address tab has a form part control inside of it, and that was one of those cases that we don't handle form parts inside of form content right now.
So you have to set this to custom, yes?
So you would have to set it to custom, and then
This means that the kind of shrinking the window would not work then.
so if you set it to custom, does that mean you don't get the responsive layout? That depends on. So the question was, if you set it to custom, do you not get the responsive layout? That depends on what you have set on the form part control and how you have things modeled inside the form that the form part control is looking at. If those things are set up correctly, you can still get that behavior.
What happens if you have such a situation and you set up, one of the 12 patterns then? Will it work?
You set the form pattern where?
On the address,
On the form that the form part's pointing to?
on the tab that contains the address tab.
So the question is, what if you set the field and field groups pattern on that addresses tab? That's going to give you a build error right now, because that field and field groups pattern subpattern only looks for fields and groups of fields. Eventually, what we'd like to do with form parts is that we would let you set field and field groups, and then we would actually peek through that form part, look at the underlying form, and say, hey, does your structure match what I'm expecting for this section based on the subpattern that you set? But we haven't done that piece yet.
Okay, so on some elements of this form you left unspecified.
Right.
So how it will behave?
Unspecified means you haven't tried to set a pattern. So
It means all the properties are visible and you are responsible for setting them up.
Yep. And actually, if we were going to be complete on this, so these would all end up being custom. These second two were, oh, thank you. So all three of these would be custom. These bottom two are the ones that have form parts inside. This one is the one that has a show hide button that kind of hides and shows some content. And so that's actually violating the pattern right now, so that one is custom.
So what is the significance of custom versus unspecified?
So the question is, what's the significance of custom versus unspecified? Custom means I've looked at this and I've decided it doesn't fit a pattern. I don't have to come back to it. Unspecified means I haven't tried. I have no idea if this fits a pattern or not.
For tracking your effort.
It's for tracking, yep. Both are going to register BP warnings.
But the runtime-wise, they will behave exactly the same.
Runtime-wise, they will behave exactly the same. All right. So future plans, just mention a few things. We've talked about several already. We already talked about the create scenario. I guess the other thing that I haven't mentioned.
One more question here. So you mentioned about documenting the exclusion. So when you set custom, you have to provide justification why.
Sure, let me show you that too. So if you provide custom, how do you do the BP exclusion? Is that the question?
So when you will compile, it will give you an error warning unless you provide?
It'll give you a BP warning if you have custom and you haven't excluded it. And so the way that you would do that is if you put that form into a folder, there's an edit best practice suppressions link. So that will open an XML file. And so you can just add an entry. We will plan a nicer interface later, but this is the current. So you copy in the information from the BP, and then there's a justification. And I will get to follow up about this particular one because it's not the detail that I want. So the idea is that you would say why you can't fit a pattern. If there's a close pattern, you would say what that pattern is. And that way we have some data about where we're missing, what we're not covering with the patterns tooling. All right. So I guess the only future plans that we haven't talked about, at least on big rocks, is, well, I think I've mentioned all of it. So there are things that we want to do to reduce custom. So those form part ones, we'd like to get that covered. There are some things with additional nestings in field and field groups, especially data groups, that you just add those by convenience and they add fields for you. It would be nice if you could have another layer of those. And so these are the things that we're looking at. One ask from you guys as you guys are migrating your forms, if you see common things in your forms, and this kind of goes back to your question about can I create a custom pattern, if there are common combinations of controls in tab pages or forms that you guys see fairly frequently, please let us know. We are open to adding patterns and subpatterns and making those available. We've covered, by our coverage numbers, we feel pretty confident that the patterns we have do a pretty good job of covering our internal app. But the thing that we don't have is you guys do things to forms that we don't, right? So we don't have as much visibility into your scenario. So if there are things that you guys do regularly that do not have pattern support, please let me know. And we can talk about how to get coverage for that.
You say let you know, but one of the things I found very hard is giving Microsoft any kind of feedback. I haven't found any kind of email or anything.
Jason Green, gre@microsoft.com. Please email me. I will write it up on the board at the end if you guys want to write it down. And we can talk about any pattern gaps that you guys see, because we would like to get people closer. It's so nice for upgrade and for consistent UI. We would like to get as many people out of custom as possible. All right, last thing, impact on form migration. So as you guys are migrating your forms, how much effort is this going to cost me? And the answer is, it depends. Of course it depends, right? So what we've done is if your forms are matching the templates relatively well, if it's a known structure that is close enough to the template, and this is the important part, and you have the form style set, because it's hard to look at structure without that intent of the style and know what you're actually trying to do, then we have upgrade scripts that are going to move a lot of your forms onto patterns automatically. So things like simple lists, list page, simple list and details, details forms, all lookups, basic lookups anyway. If you're close to those templates or you match those templates, there's a very good chance that a lot of your forms will automatically get patterns applied, and that will reduce your work significantly. So if a good portion of your model uses things like that, you may not have a lot of work. On the other hand, if you have stayed away from form templates and have just gone off and done your own thing, or if you, for some reason, do not set form style and it's set to auto everywhere, because we don't have any upgrade scripts for style equals auto at this point, then this is going to become more of a manual process, and it may take more time and more effort, unfortunately. The ISVs and partners that have moved over so far, there's been kind of a range of how much has hit, how much has been automatically applied, anywhere from 20-ish% all the way up to 80%, pretty good. So again, it just depends on your solution and how close you align to the patterns. Yep.
You're better off doing that review in 2012 first before doing the upgrade?
the question is, are you better off doing the review in 2012 before you do the upgrade? I don't know that it would be worth it to look through the forms themselves. The only piece that might be useful is looking to see if you have form style set, because that will get you a long way if your control structures are fine. But even then, if you're having to walk through the forms anyway, it might be simpler just to be like, oh, this is the details form, apply, or this is a lookup, this is a simple list. It won't take that much time on the simple forms. And I think let me exit out of here for a second. So the slide that I skipped actually showed internally what the breakdown of some of the more popular forms was in our system. So 20% of our forms were simple lists. Again, these should migrate pretty easily. Dialogues are kind of a different beast. They're very varied. But yeah, it just depends on what your form styles are as to how well this is going to work for you. And with that, I think that is all I had for you guys today, and we'll just open it up for questions. Yep.
In 2012, if you attempt to apply your patterns or styles and you run the styler checker,
Yep.
And you get your BP and you fix everything, does that kind of guarantee it's going to be automatically upgraded?
So the question is, if in AX 2012 you run the form style checker, you align, you get rid of all those deviations. If we have an upgrade script for that form style, which I believe all the ones in that list we do, then you should get then yes. Because the upgrade scripts are based on those templates from 2012 to say, hey, this is the structure that we expect from people, so we want to make this easy and minimize your work if you're following that. So the question is, if you customize a form in the new Dynamics AX in 2012, your customization comes over, will it tell you if you're violating the form or the form pattern? Yes, it will. If it doesn't, so sometimes what happens with overlayered forms is the underlying structure has changed and we don't know what to do with controls. So they all get stuck into a separate group. I think they call it, I can't remember what the name they gave it. No, it's not that. It's like lost group or no parent group or something. So a lot of times if it can't find controls, it'll stick, if it doesn't know where to stick them in the new form, it'll stick it into this just random group at the end. And a lot of times that is what causes pattern errors, because you have this extra group that the pattern doesn't expect. And you have to go through and figure out where those controls go in your form. So that validation should be there for customizations.
Your form is a custom pattern at the top level. Can you subpattern controls in the form so that these things like subpattern updates that will come out?
Sure. So the question is, if you have custom at the top level, can you apply subpatterns to containers inside of that? And the answer is yes. So if you have a details master form, for example, and there's something unique that you couldn't set the pattern at the top, all of those fast tabs in the details view, you do have the option to set a subpattern on. And that will actually help your control coverage numbers, right? Because not all of the form it won't be the entire form that isn't covered by patterns. It'll just be everything outside of those fast tabs. Any other questions? One right here.
Is it possible through the pattern to set different behavior on mobile device and
The question is it possible with a pattern to set different behavior on a mobile device? That's exactly where what we're looking at right now is how do we make transformations to the control so that you get more of a mobile-specific experience, and how do we build that behavior into the patterns itself?
exactly that? Like what you do, you just be flowing
Right now, we're just free-flowing the
But
controls.
you're not hiding or showing them or random different behavior depending on the type of the device.
Right now, we're not doing those
Are you
things.
planning to?
So there's been talks about, there are, the mobility side of this is also my area. So there's 6 different mobile or responsive design techniques. Some of them are like replace, re-architect, where you make more significant changes to the way the controls look, which controls are shown. So there will be some of that will just happen automatically with the pattern. The part about hiding certain fields, hiding certain actions that aren't going to be usable in a mobile, there will probably be a different strategy outside of the pattern itself for those kinds of situations. One line of thinking right now, again, we're not sold on any of this, is perhaps a mobile tailoring, where you would go through and say, hey, for this on the phone, for sales table, I want to see these 5 fields or these 10 fields, and I want these 2 actions, and that's all you get, right? So providing some way to give you a mobile view of a form through personalization might be an option to get you down. I think that's what you're heading at, is how do you restrict the number of fields?
It's insane trying to display like entire customer master form on the phone.
Right. Well,
Technically you can,
and,
but it would be not really useful.
right. And it works fairly well right now, but we're going to look at ways to optimize that experience as we go forward as well. And give you ways to get very targeted scenarios in mobile.
And your email is?
Oh, my email, yeah. Is my inbox going to be full after this? Maybe that wasn't the best idea. I'll just stick it on this slide. jasong@microsoft.com. Jason Green. Yep, first 3 letters of my last name. No, I think that was just the combination that was open. So yes, please let me know if you have pattern gaps or want to discuss modifications, new patterns, new subpatterns. Very happy to talk to you about that. Any other questions? We have a couple of minutes left, it looks like.
So when do you expect to be able to make new forms out of a pattern?
The question is, when do you expect to be able to make new forms from patterns? I can't guarantee any timing yet. It will not be update 1. I can say that with certainty. The earliest would be update 2.
When's that? Fall, spring?
That is, well, the times on that are still.
I mean, if you say 2017, I'm cool. I'm curious.
I don't want to guarantee anything. I would hope, well,
Come on.
hopefully in one of the, not the first update, but hopefully in one of the next 2. But no guarantees.
Is there any detailed roadmap? Because, there is actually kind of high-level roadmap, what, the features missing. But is there any kind of detailed roadmap with all those kind of small little tweaks, features that you're planning to kind of do? Is there anything like that published?
For patterns or for?
For general
The question is there a detailed roadmap published for AX in general?
improvements, fixing features, additional elements, like for instance, editing the best practices. Now it opens the editor to edit the XML. I'm talking about those whole things.
I'm not sure if that's documented anywhere right now. I'm sure we could look at getting something like that out just so it's on the horizon so you guys know. It's hard to do that without, we don't want to guarantee any timelines because you never know when it's going to come in, but I'll have to check. Oh, sorry.
Lookups actually that we have now. If you start typing something in the lookup, it's not filtering it out like it was in 2012 and stuff like that. Is there a chance that you will implement that, or you need to use filters all the time?
So in The question was in filters, when you start typing, it doesn't filter the values?
Not in filters.
In lookups.
Yeah.
So is this, you're in the control and you start typing? Or is this once the lookup's already open?
Once it's open.
And your focus is in the lookup?
Yeah.
So the idea right now, I don't know if you guys have seen the new lookups. That's also my feature. But what we're trying to move towards is more of a type ahead where you type in the lookup field itself, and it will filter on the fly, basically. So if you start typing, well, maybe we'll just, I don't know if you guys have seen this yet. We'll just, we'll just show you real quick. So right now, things are more type ahead, where if you start typing, we're going to automatically pop the lookup for you, and you can keep modifying this. The lookup's going to update as you're typing to show the values.
This is different from CTP 8, right?
This was in CTP 8, I believe. So the other piece that's nice is maybe you don't know the customer group, but hey, I know that it's major customers. Now what you can do, and this isn't in all lookups, but you can start to type this, and we're going to start filtering on the name as well. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is if you can start doing this from the lookup field itself, you don't really need to be typing once you're in the lookup field itself.
I just haven't found this kind of.
Yeah, so this is new in RTW. It's not across the board, but we're pushing. So a lot of the auto lookups will have this. There's some conditions for performance about when we can enable this, and so we're trying to get more and more adoption. But this is coming.
Is there some special settings that you need to do?
There's a wiki document that talks about how you uptake this. If you look for contextual data entry, it will talk about a number of different scenarios, different lookup scenarios, and how you would enable this behavior in your lookups. So you guys can do this now on your controls. And we have some example code to show you. And so, okay. And so, yeah, in the future, we'd like to do all columns. Right now, it's just ID and name. But it's an improvement from where we were before. So with that, we will close. Thank you guys very much.